What are the dynamics as we understand them?
Putin's keeping his cards close to his vest. He's keeping his options open. That's in fact accurate. What he said in his first public comments, where the perpetrators were apprehended just about to enter Ukraine, they were headed in that direction, that there was a window open for them on the other side, indicating that there was accomplices on the Ukrainian side of the border. Then he went on to say that they will completely obliterate anyone who had anything to do with it or supported it. So he's again laying the foundation work by pointing out that that there was appeared to be some complicity with Ukraine, but he stopped short of directly blaming him. Dmitry Medvedev, on the other hand, one of his senior foreign policy and military advisors, former president, was pretty explicit, said if there is a direct tie between Ukraine, there will be an overwhelming response by the Russian state, and they will meet, quote, death for death. So a lot of people, besides just the media, have definitely been pointing to Ukraine.
But how does that square with the fact that U.S. intelligence did attempt to get a warning to the Russian government when it appeared on our radar that there was going to be some kind of extremist attack? Can you walk us through that aspect of this?
I can tell you one thing right off the bat that will preface my comments here is that for the people who are viewing this, if you already didn't like Russia, you're for sure that this was ISIS and had nothing to do with Ukraine. If you didn't like Ukraine before, i.e. in Russia, then you're going to believe definitely they had something to do with it. Here's the problem. There are a lot of inconsistencies in what's been portrayed here in relation to ISIS. Some things just don't seem quite right. They're a little off. They could be ISIS. They could also be an additional hand behind it. They could have been using ISIS. There's evidence actually for both. So all the Russians are absolutely convinced that it's Ukraine, and all the Ukrainian and the Western are absolutely convinced this had nothing to do with Ukraine. So they're interpreting the same facts in very, very different ways. One of the key things here is that this mention you have here of March 7th and 8th, where the U.S. gave this specific warning. The Russian side is saying that, yes, because apparently America got hold of this plot, and they knew that it could go sideways really bad, and so actually tried to warn Russia to get rid of it so it wouldn't have happened. Now, interesting that note said within 48 hours of the 7th and 8th of March. That's when it was. Well, on that date, there was a huge tour group at that concert hall that was a big tied to the Russian president himself, Putin. The guy who was on stage there was a close ally of his. So there was a lot of concern that that's who the target was. And the Russian side is saying that because of that warning, they actually had security on there, which thwarted that attack. Once it didn't happen, then the security went back down to normal, and then apparently the attack was redone, according to their side. Now, according to the Ukraine side and according to the American side, no, we warned about ISIS all along, and you didn't do anything to stop it. So you have these two different narratives on the same set of facts.
Perhaps it would be useful to get into some of the details of what actually happened in the terror attack for those who aren't familiar with the events on the ground. Do we know more about how this managed to happen, who the gunmen were specifically? And maybe you could also speak to reporting that the footage that has been leaked of the gunmen, it seems to indicate that they have been abused perhaps at some point between the time that they were captured and now.
Without question, they have been absolutely brutalized, and Russia has not been concerned about sharing that video, so they aren't worried about any negative ramifications, and those guys have just been absolutely just brutalized from what happened. One of them, I don't want to be too graphic, but had something really bad done to him and videoed and then shared out by the Russian security forces. But the bottom line, though, is the reason why there are some inconsistencies. So, of course, you probably know that the ISIS official website has published a lot of video. They had them in front of the ISIS flag. And, you know, by all accounts, they were doing some of the things that they defaced some of the bodies in the ways that ISIS does in this. Again, horrific. I don't even want to describe it in detail. But they did some of that. But the way that these guys were recruited, number one, they weren't diehard ISIS people like you've seen who were willing to die for the cause. These guys were recruited from within Russia by someone claiming to be an associate of the pastor, of the preacher, the ISIS preacher. So they didn't really know who they were talking to. Literally, it could have been anyone, but they were given a large sum of money to take care of this operation. They were already in Russia, and then they were trying to escape in the direction of Ukraine. So that's the part that we know. We know that they got money via electronic means, some of the stuff, and then they were provided with weapons from sources that not yet has been identified, how they actually got that part. But ordinarily, or very frequently anyway, ISIS, has these ideological people who are willing to die for their cause. These guys were in it for money. It was done during Ramadan, which ordinarily, ISIS being this hyper Islamic group wouldn't ordinarily do. But it's also possible. And that's really why there's so much effort, room in here for multiple interpretations. And right now, we really don't know what happened.
Will this, increase Russian solidarity or support for what's going on in Ukraine? Or will it be a case where they say, Putin failed to provide us security and there will be greater outcry about what's going on? What do you predict?
Yeah, again, it depends on where you sit, because in all of the Western media, everybody's jumping on that second version there that, this shows that Putin's weak, he can't control his people, it's undercut. But that's not playing in Russia. I assure you right now, you absolutely have the 9/11 effect that everybody is rallying around behind the president. There is overwhelming public support all across the nation. Huge crowds of people have come. They've almost turned the Crocus Hall into a shrine, and look, thousands of people lining up to come and see it and put down flowers and all kinds of other things. Other cities have been doing the same kind of things. It's on all the televisions everywhere. There's a big issue there. And my concern is that this has a similar case as what happened after 9/11, where George Bush basically had a free hand to do anything he wanted because our people were so angry at what had happened. You saw Netanyahu. You're still seeing Netanyahu take advantage of what happened on the 10th or 7th of October, and he has a free hand to do whatever he wants, and all kinds of excesses take place afterwards. I will be watching to see, does Putin do the same thing, because he basically has a free hand to do nearly anything, and there are many ways he could escalate this war in Ukraine if he chooses to say that's who did it.
What is the rationale for why this ISIS-K group would want to attack Russia in the first place, motivated by something other than Ukraine?
There has been a lot of that. Even before this terror attack happened, there was lots of reports that the U.S. was trying to tell the Ukraine side to back off these attacks into civilian cities of Belgorod, these attacks into the little villages that on the Russian side of the border, because they didn't have any military utility. It was just attacks into civilian areas, which kind of undercut our comment of trying to blame Russia for attacking civilian areas in Ukraine. So they asked them to knock that off, at least according to some reports, before the terrorist attack happened, which would be in line with, if they were planning a terror attack, we would not want that to happen because of the potential blowback and escalation. To the second part of your question there about ISIS motivation, that's another part of the inconsistencies, because there are a lot of other countries that should be higher on their ISIS hit list than Russia, who was way down the list of people that had done anything to ISIS. I think they hadn't had any direct ISIS contact since 2017, if I'm not mistaken, at least on anything meaningful. So they have been kind of off the radar here. So why would you have this extraordinary incendiary conflict against Russia on a civilian target in the capital city? It's nothing but going to stir up lots of anger and hatred. And the question would be, towards what end? What message were they trying to send if it was, in fact, ISIS? And so far, it's not clear how they would benefit from it and why they would choose that target over anything else they could have done. But again, sometimes terror doesn't have any rationale or logic. They just do things. So it's still possible. It could have been ISIS, just like it looks. And it's possible it could have been having somebody else's authorship.
Right. I don't want to play into, war on terror kind of tropes. Could it be, a response to Russian policy in Syria, which I believe, is territory they purport belongs to them? On some level, it is. ISIS is a fanatical death cult of strange priorities that we've seen over and over again.
It is, yeah, and the issues is primarily that they do seek a global caliphate, but it's very small in territorial ambitions, in Iraq and in Syria, where they had it and then lost it. And it's just hard to see how attacking Russia plays into their plans for wanting to do something in the Middle East. So who knows?